Bonjour, comment allez-vous? Hi, how are you guys doing? Dr. Dinka here with one of our last lectures. We'll be talking about France and future trends as well as France and the world. I think it's a very interesting topic and something that really affects all of us. And I would like to start with talking about the role that France has in the world, and then we'll continue on to some of the issues that France still has within its societies and any future trends that we can see, and discuss a little bit about where um, France is going. Um, Here, I have this picture, a very famous picture of France's president Emmanuel Macron when he met with President Putin right before Russia invaded Ukraine. And Macron was trying, it was a last effort to try to convince Putin that um, the war in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine was not a good idea. And you can tell um, by the distance between the two um, that there's something that Macron also discusses in one of the videos that we're watching for this week. It's this isolation that Putin was going through, this fear of COVID that um, made whatever ideas he had about the world even worse. And it ended in this tragedy, this war in Ukraine that has been going on for more than 1 year. All right, so I like to give an overview of some of the materials that we'll be studying this week, and also talk a little bit about um, France's role in the world and the relations between France and the rest of the nations. So when it comes to the world, when it comes to world relations, France is seen as a leader. I repeat, France is a leader in world relations. And we can see this especially when President Macron was one of the few presidents to, as you mentioned, to meet with Putin before Russia invaded Ukraine, trying to persuade him not to invade and trying to establish diplomacy and peace. So it showed leadership, it showed initiative on the part of Macron to really do this. Also, France is a vital country for maintaining the peace in the world. Again, it's a vital country for maintaining the world peace. And that's even recently, as far as 3 days ago, um, President Macron visited China and met with Chinese President Xi. And this was very interesting because right now there are tensions between the US and China, also due to the spy balloon that the US has shut down, if you have watched the news recently. And Macron, in this video that we're viewing for this week, told China that they should influence to help end the war in Ukraine. However, China hasn't agreed to it. And also China, while it condemns violence in general, doesn't condemn by name Russia's aggression on the country of Ukraine. It's very interesting. And President Xi was very vague in his language, as you will see in the video. Um, Macron and uh, China's president are not on the same page when it comes down to the conflict in Ukraine. However, Macron sees Europe sees a European Union that's ready to engage with China more than the US is. And also, it's worth mentioning that Macron is not as harsh of a critic of China as the US is. He's a softer touch, as the video puts it. And also, Macron is, I think, very smart because he sees some economic benefits um, that that France can benefit from by engaging with a lot of these other world powers. Something that's interesting about this Macron's meeting with the Chinese president Xi is that Macron never mentioned Taiwan during his meeting in China, even though at the very same time, we're talking about a few days ago, Taiwanese officials visited the U.S. and that escalated in turn this tension between China and Taiwan and China and the U.S. And Macron is seen as playing a diplomatic game that definitely it advantages France. So I do recommend that you watch these two incredible videos that were in a way explain this view that France has about its role in the world. And we're going back to that article that we read a while ago in our class, where France sees itself on a civilized mission, and in this context of this world relations as a peacemaker. So it's the nation that brings peace to the other nations. Also, something else that we're going to be looking at is some criticism that Macron has had in France recently. And you have an article there. I'll share the screen with you so that you can see. This is actually an article I selected from CNN that talks about, if you have been watching the news, talks about these impromptu protests that broke out in Paris and across several French cities following a move by the government to force through reforms of the pension system that will push the retirement age from 62 to 64. Now, talking about France's future trends, this is a developing story, right? So it might change. So by the time you watch this, the news might be outdated. Something very interesting is that we have this image. This was from the protests in Paris. And you can see we have a picture of Macron. It's actually a picture of one of the French royalties, and it says Macron méprisant de la République. So you have Macron's head on the picture of the France's former king, and it's saying define Macron of the Republic. So he's seen especially as somebody who is seen by some of his critics as almost as a dictator, because Macron has to have his way. While Macron at the same time mentions that he's doing this for the benefits of all French people, because if he doesn't do these pension reforms, then the country risks of not having money for pensions in a few years. And it's mentioned in this article that no pension reform has made the French happy. So the French have a history of being revolutionary, of revolting, going on strikes when things don't go their way, or if they're trying to accomplish something. So quoting from the article, it's saying that each time there is opposition from public opinion, then little by little the project passes and basic public opinion is resigned to it. He said, adding that the government's failure, excuse me, was in its inability to sell the project to French people. So the way Macron portrayed this was not in a way that it made sense for the French people. But however, this is not the first time that this issue happened in France. Pension reforms have long been a thorny issue in France, going back to 1995, after weeks-long mass protests forced the government of the day to abandon plans to reform public sector pensions. So the government gave in, and then in 2010, millions took to the streets to oppose raising the retirement age by 2 years to 62. And in 2014, further reforms were met with wide protests as well. So this is not the first time, but it just happens that it happens during Macron's presidency. Now, for many in France, the pension system, as with social support more generally, is viewed as the bedrock of the state's responsibility and relationship with its citizens. And the French pension system plays into this idea that the French have a great deal of importance on enjoying life. In fact, they call it the art of French living, l'art de vivre à la française, and they carry this verb for living through life stages. So, for example, if somebody plans on retiring in France, they're glad to know that there are many ways to provide for their golden years. So, the French pension system has three pillars: the state pension, compulsory supplementary pension, and voluntary private pensions. And workers who want to boost their pension savings can contribute to all three pillars. Now, France has a large retired population. Nearly 15 million residents are drawing a state pension, and out of a country of 66 million, so that's a lot. And the number is only going up. So as you mentioned, the government plans a major overhaul of the French pension system. Proposals include progressively increasing the retirement age and changing the minimum state pension amount. So both of them you can see here. And social security or sécurité sociale contributions also pay into a French state pension called retraite de base or minimum state pension. And these payments are compulsory for all workers. Now, we have to keep in mind that retirees must work for at least 42 years to claim a full French state pension, 4 years if born before 1952. And by 2035, the requirement will rise to about 43 years for those born from 1973 onwards. And it's possible to claim a pro rata French pension if you've worked and made social security contributions in France for at least 10 years. Now, the protests also were criticized by other nations. So this is where we have this relationship between France and other Western nations. So in another article from Deutsche Welle, from Germany's national broadcast company, it says that in a number of other European countries, people are shaking their heads at these French demonstrations because they already worked to an older age before being eligible for pensions. So Germany, for example, the pensionable age is to climb gradually to 67, starting from 2024. So there's definitely contrasts with 62 that's right now in France. So what countries like Germany don't understand is why are people protesting in France, because they already have it so much better than in other countries around the world when it comes to pension. So it's always hard to compare pension systems because they all are very complex and very different. This comparison is skewed in a way, says Ulrich Becker from the Max Planck Institute for Social Law and Social Policy, which compares pension schemes from around the world in its pension map. And that is because the rise that has brought so many out of the protest in France is actually an increase in the earliest age at which paid workers can retire without deductions from their pensions. So previously they had to work for about 41 and a half years after the reforms, supposed to rise to about 43 years. And In Germany, one can retire at the age of 63, but only if you have already contributed to the pension funds for about 45 years. So again, the French still have a better deal. And these conditions are further complicated by other factors, such as the year when one was born. And in France, a full pension does not depend on time spent working. It's paid out only after someone has reached 67. This will remain the case even after the reform. However, the situation has deteriorated considerably since Macron decided on March 16 to adopt the reform using special constitutional powers to bypass the parliament. Remember, we talked about this at the beginning of the semester, that about the powers that the French president has. So he actually went and applied those powers to bypass the parliament. And of course, he was met with a lot of criticism on the part of the French. So this is still an ongoing issue, and we'll see what happens in the future. So while fiercely criticized by opposition parties and undemocratic, the move has also sat uneasily with some lawmakers in Macron's Renaissance Party and its allies, after some of them have seen protesters vandalize their offices. And of course, it's starting to impact a lot of the politicians due to these protests. And when asked about the divisions, the president's office said that the majority of Macron's camp remains strong and united, according to Reuters. Okay, so this will be it for this week's lecture. I hope that you guys found it useful. I encourage you to please complete those discussions that you have due by the end of this week, and the requirement is 5 minutes. 5 minutes for everybody. So find an article and a video. You can have more than 2 sources. You can use a PowerPoint. So again, the idea is for you to get engaged and have an informed conversation about some of these issues that we've been talking about this week. Bonne soirée, au revoir. So have a good evening, and I will see you next time virtually. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Bye.